Ed doesn't know this, but he's something of a hero of mine. When I decided to be a cinematographer, I lived in Morristown, New Jersey, which is kind of where he's from as well. So I thought, hey, if he can make it, so can I. Yeah, Ed, great to have you here.
Well, in 50 years, I didn't get too far because General Camera was just across the road. So that's pretty funny to me that I'm at the Japik Center and General Camera was just across the street. But yes, I've always been supportive of film. And so, you know, I can try to articulate why film. You know, for me, film has a texture and a depth to it that digital is, and there's nothing wrong with digital, and in fact it's wonderful for me for documentaries, but I find that what you struggle for in the digital world to make it feel like film. I never hear, well, maybe Michael Mann says that he tries to make film look digital, but that's Michael Mann. But, you know, that it's, the thing is in digital, it's pixel fixated on one plane. And in film, there's 3 layers, RGB. And those layers, even though they're microscopic, they give you depth to the image like almost like an etching, the way it's exposed and then developed. And so that gives you depth to the image, even if you end up, for me, in a DI, you still have that depth, and it's a chemical process, which I think is closer to what we are chemically than, even though part of us are electronic too, but that, and the grain structure, you know, it's fine grain for highlights and larger grain for underexposure or medium exposure, and so that moves in the frame from frame to frame and, you know, what you're photographing. And so for me, that gives a kind of an anthropomorphic feeling that I think captures something about how we exist ourselves. And also the other thing that I've always struggled for in the digital is the color rendition. Color definitely, film sees color differently than digital. I always use this as an example. If you're shooting 3200 Kelvin and you have daylight coming in the window and you're not color correcting it, you get the mixture of daylight and tungsten light, and so somewhere you're getting green because it's like oil paint. You're mixing the color temperature. Where digital, you get the coolness and you get the warmth, but they don't contaminate each other. And so for me, I've always worked with that as an aspect of using color as a psychological effect more than just a decorative effect, and that I can mix the color in film better than I can in digital. And then, you know, I know this whole exhibit here is about creating beautiful images and how we reference beautiful photography. But for me, pretty isn't the requirement for what makes an image strong or that it affects the viewer. So I always think it's what will tell the poetic or the psychological authenticity of the image that's important in our storytelling and how we use images in a film. And for me, the language of film isn't necessarily words, but images. And so I respond to working with, I've been lucky enough to work with directors that trust images to convey the emotion of what you're seeing. And so I always use this as a reference in a way. In literature and in writing, you can enter the interior world of the character in a sentence. You can explain what the character is thinking or feeling in first person or in a third person. And, but you use much more language to express where you are. And in film, it's just the opposite. It shows in a shot, you see where you are, and it places your world, but it's much more difficult to enter the interior world of the character, and unless you use a voiceover, but I'm talking about in images. And that's what I'm always striving for with a director, how I can enter the interior world of the character. So I think what we're going to show, well, I know we're going to show, like, I put together a reel a while back, and it was a dear friend of mine, Hank Corwin, a wonderful editor in LA, who's worked, you know, JFK and a number of, you know, films. And he knew me. I mean, I've known him for, you know, 50 years. Well, maybe, yeah, almost 50 years. And so he put together a reel of, like, from documentaries up till today. And I always think that gives encouragement to people to think that you don't start, you know, you start somewhere and you maybe end up somewhere else, but that there's always an interconnection between what you're doing with images. And I was lucky enough to, you know, because we're all here in New York, I started at the Maisel brothers, the documentary filmmakers that made Give Me Shelter and Grey Gardens and a number of films. And they were always so supportive of me. I made a film about a therapeutic community, how for drug addicts, Odyssey House, and they had editing rooms, and I edited the film there myself, and so they were kind of interested, like, who was this kid that was like shooting it and editing it, and so that I became their kind of the office manager, and then did sound, and then I did second camera for Al. So it's nice to still be around all that. So all right, we'll look at the reel and then
poetry?
What?
Want to look at some of your poetry?
Well, I don't know if it's poetry, but we can look at some of it.
The night flight from Los Angeles brought me into New York on a cool and clear day. It was only upon seeing a little boy in the subway, a boy who simply didn't want to take another step, that I realized why my images of Tokyo seemed to me like those of a sleepwalker.
What are you doing? Asta's thore kabe, huh? To balo hai jado. Big suffering.
This is your old case, yeah?
Oh, he's looking.
What the hell are you doing?
Just watching.
Some guy that looks maybe a little like you does a stick-up 4 hours ago. A cop pulls you in because he's cold and wants to go inside. They grab your stash, your number's up.
right? So I know I was going to go from that to everything you touched upon already about the importance of film in your career and your filmmaking. But I want to touch upon the point you were making about exploring the interior of a character and the limiting facets of different film, right? So how are you leveraging, say, your film gauge or color versus black and white to discover more of that interior or the exterior of your character?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think whatever medium you shoot your film in or is situating structure the point of view of who are you telling the story through. And then in all these situations, for me, it's always about externalizing and visualizing what's inside the characters. And you can create that for the audience. I mean, a film, let's say, like Carol, I think it works, if it works, because it visually found the metaphor. It's almost like what the obstruction is for us as the viewer becomes the obstruction and conflict for the characters, like we see them in doorways, through weather, night steam in the streets. You don't totally see them as they're looking out, we're looking in. And so if you can create the experience for the audience of what the emotion is in the character, then I think you've helped the cinematography relate to the storytelling. And that's what my background, I studied painting, so I never thought there's one way to tell a story. And to work with someone like Todd Haynes, his background was semiotics and the study of language and images. And so we connected that way and not all directors are visual. And so it really helps when you work with someone that has a similar understanding of how images can communicate an idea or a feeling. I mean, for me, images are like music, because it's a nonverbal form of communicating. And so, like I say, it's not important just to make pretty images, but to make images that have authenticity, that you, as an audience, believe in what you're looking at.
9 o'clock, lady.
The elderly composer's home was in Montgomery, Alabama.
Where's my suitcase?
Put it in the bag.
I want my fucking suitcase.
Carol, what's going on? Carol! Carol! Carol, what are you doing with that? What happened? Carol, you're scaring me.
I mean, this touches upon everything you were just saying, why I love this clip as well, because there's so much storytelling here, because we start so removed from Carol. Mm-hmm. We're outside looking in, and then we have her trapped in this doorway. And if you've seen the film, it perfectly articulates everything that's going on there just through the images, and the narrative as well. It's also, just from a technical point, at that final frame, that's a tricky one with your subject in the doorway and you're shooting outside. Which stocks did you use for Carol?
Well, that was daylight stock, yeah. So that was probably 48. I think that was, ASA 164 with an 85. But the part that's very complicated was that opening shot with the reflections. I really didn't know how much look, if you shoot digitally, you're getting to see what you're doing. The difference in film is you're like a step removed. You go in with a concept, an idea, a spot meter, an incident meter, and you know, evaluate the exposure latitude, but you don't really know how it's going to come out because until it gets developed and you see the dailies. So that was a real critical thing where I knew I was playing off of the reflections outside on the window, but how much I should light the interior so I would read detail inside, but not like be so bright that it would take over the outside. You know, that's always tricky when you shoot with reflections that way, is to know the level of exposure from the interior to the exterior. And I was just kind of lucky that when also to work with Todd, who was willing to take that chance that maybe it would fail, you know, maybe it wouldn't work out, you know. So, you know, that's the thing about film, is there's always the unexpectedness that always can be either wonderful or a problem. But when you get it, there's a depth to the image that's very special. So that for me was kind of my favorite sequence in the whole film, because it was such an unknown. And generally I found when I really don't know if exactly how something's going to come out, that's generally the better image than if I kind of dial it in and know that's the way it should look.
Do you have a reservation?
Sorry, I'm looking for someone.
Ma'am, I can't see you.
Good night, Sammy. Mr. Ellsworth. Good night. Thanks again. Question.
Right? There's a lovely way that you use movement and blocking and the focal length of the camera, the lens, to bring these separate people apart, these two characters, and bring them back together. And I hear there's a funny story about how you decided to move the camera for this scene.
Well, what was interesting, it's always sometimes a compromise. And Todd said to me in this scene, it should all be hand-hold. And because I knew why. He wanted to express the emotional externalization of the subjectivity of even the rest of the film of falling in love. And so there's an uneasiness to the camera. And I thought that was too far, because the rest of the film, the hardest thing I think to do in a film is to be consistent in your style. And a lot of times, you know, a director will see a cool shot over the weekend and say, oh, we should do a shot like that. And even for myself, it's you don't really know that your style or your approach to the film is speaking back to you, and you may not even see that until it's edited, because the editing is really the completion of your visualization of the story. But if you have a director that understands how they're approaching the story visually when you're shooting it, it's going to help it in the editing room. And not to say that the editing can't improve it, but sometimes editing can go against what you're creating on the set. So anyway, in this situation, I said to Todd, well, could we put the operator on a dolly and it was on a carpet, and let him handhold with the movement of the dolly. And that's how we did the shot. It was kind of a compromise, but in a way it was better than either one of us thought. And then he also added a little zoom. So the movement is unjust. I mean, it becomes kind of some kind of emotional feeling maybe between them, but there's still some consistency in the movement being on a dolly. And that's how that ended up the way it did visually.
Well, the pacing of the movement too is just so elegant that it feels informed by this story and by this relationship
yeah,
too.
well, that's the editing.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, I guess what I'm trying to talk about is that the cinematography isn't just the representation of the view of the story, but it's how you create the psychological, in this case, the amorous subjectivity of the characters. So that's what you kind of got to find. I don't know how many of you are cinematographers or image makers, is you kind of explore the story to find, you know, how you create images that bring the viewer to the world that you're exposing. You know, I think that's you know, the idea.
And you don't always need the nicest tools to get there too, because this is.
Well, this is an interesting way. Oh, good, you have that.
Yeah.
So this was at the Cincinnati Club. We had shot this whole film in Cincinnati because, believe it or not, you can't find New York in the 50s anymore, or maybe in rare little places. But Cincinnati, there's parts of Cincinnati that you think you're back in New York in the 50s. But this was at a club, and obviously it was historical, and so they wouldn't let us put up lights, really. And I had this gaffer I've worked with for like 35 years, another New Yorker, John DeBlau. And so we lit this with China balls, paper China balls. And the skirts are like plastic, you know, for tables.
Tablecloth,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And so I kept it off the background, but it was enough to illuminate. And then it's always important to me that like table lights there will give you the feeling that they're being lit from the table lights bouncing off the table. And so that's the way we lit that, with simple China balls. In fact, even Maria, we were in a lot of, you know, sensitive and historical places to shoot Maria in Budapest, and I went back to my China balls. Maria Callas lost her life at 53, and but what they don't realize is that she had a illness that was, you know, it was that affected her mobility and her voice. It was called EDS. Anyway, it was an autoimmune disease. And she struggled with that her whole life. And so she demanded of herself a certain kind of proficiency, and so she demanded of others. And then the other thing was she was exploited and extorted by her mother, and then her first husband, her only husband. And then later she was in a relationship with Onassis, and he left her for Jackie Kennedy. And so she never achieved kind of the admiration and love of her public that she did, that she never had in her private life. So I realized, and as much as I said to everybody, it isn't just about beautiful images. I was put in a place because she was around these images, and but she was never really totally. How can I say it? She presented herself in that world, but emotionally, I think she was never able to really participate in. So the film really becomes an opera about Maria Callas, because many of the themes of operas and the aesthetics and forms became her own life. Betrayal, unrequited love, and her loss and revenge. That's themes in many operas that she sang. And so I created this idea with Pablo that we would actually shoot it like an opera, but not only from, let's say, a heightened reality where the colors aren't necessarily naturalistic, but also where a moving camera was kind of a visual proscenium, a visual stage. So I wanted to put you, the audience, as if you were sitting watching an opera. And that was kind of my guiding idea of how to portray the story about Maria. So maybe that's enough.
It's a good second.
So we see this again. Maybe I can talk over it, like using color green. Now it could be fluorescent light, but I pushed it so it's more theatrical. And using the crane like this, but there's a certain distance to the character, using wider lenses. So it kind of meditates the same feeling as if you're observing something from a distance. And this is Super 8. We used a lot of different formats in the film because that's the way she was, she was photographed by the world's greatest photographers, Cecil Beaton, Irving Penn, Richard Avedon, and so there was that. And then there's black and white in the film because of her past. That's the time period in the 40s where she's in Greece. And so we shot in black and white. And then the Super 8 was her butler, Ferruccio, photographed her, and that's when she was the most open, kind of like with home movies. So all those different visual aspects, I thought, kind of contributed to the fractured part of her world. So visually, that's the way.
Yeah, you get a sense of that in this scene, the way that we feel like we're getting pushed into this character's pain. Mm-hmm. This is how I feel watching it. So we start with this, flat space shot, and then we end with the Super 8. And previously in the movie, you see the Super 8, and it feels historical in its context. Mm-hmm. And here, it feels like we're viewing the interior of this character, mm-hmm. and like the way you said, with the presence of the grain and everything and where it falls here, mm-hmm. it feels like that fracturing of her in this moment.
That's good.
Nice.
So maybe they have questions or?
Well, we have one more clip for Maria.
Oh, we do, all right.
Yeah.
All right, they told me an hour, so that's why I keep pushing. Oh, this is the black and white. 35. Can they turn it up a little? Am I hearing?
May I say that tonight you defined Violetta forever. You are Violetta. Maria, where have you been?
I think you know.
Excuse me. My English no good, but Flower says it. Magnificent Traviata.
Tonight everyone wants to worship you.
Excuse me, Madame Callas. There is someone who's just dying to meet you. I wondered if you would make his day, his week, his month, his life. Excuse me, sir. May I borrow your wife just for a few moments?
I think there is a queue.
No, I don't queue.
Who are you?
Aristotle Onassis. This is my party, thrown in your honor. And if you want to count them, I got 1,000 pink roses just for you. I was told it was a smart thing to do, to associate myself with the prima donna assoluta. So this party was a business strategy. But then I fell in love.
You fell in love with opera?
No, I fell in love with you. I'm ugly, but I'm rich. I'm Greek, but I'm from Argentina. I'm married, but it's 1959. So, to falling in love through binoculars, I watched you through these.
You love me, and yet you've never set eyes on me before tonight.
Oh, now I'm offended. We met in Venice at the film festival. But I guess there were a lot of movie stars, so you forgot the little ugly guy. Well, I didn't forget you. Do you want to dance?
I should get back to my husband.
You'll never go back to your husband. Sometimes this thing happens, the thing that's happening right now.
And what is the thing that is happening right now?
A decision is made, not by anyone, but it's how it's going to be.
It's a lovely sequence where we're being led by her through this party, and then ultimately Aristotle takes over. The decision to shoot black and white was purely, I was wondering as I watched this if it was purely a historical context, because it's also after you get to know his character and his impact on her. I mean, he sucks the life out of her. I was wondering about your choice, your character informed choice of black and white.
Well, no, I mean, the black and white was really just the past, you know, on a mechanical level. But all the way through the film, I want you to feel like you are Maria, you know, in a third person. And that the camera has an observational and a reflective part. So again, you know, it's like you, the viewer, are participating in observing her world. And just on a technical level, so that was actually in a library in Budapest. So, and again, Pablo Larraín always wants to shoot like with a 24 or 28, many times even a 14. So I had no place to put lights. So I don't know, I did bring stills. I don't know if they show you. So in her apartment, I lit everything from the exterior. In fact, I never had so many lights and cranes, because I told them, well, if I can't use the light inside, and we weren't on a set, I didn't have the ceiling height, I have to light through the windows, which honestly I prefer. And it was also during COVID, so I had every crane and light I could get in Budapest. And, but in this situation, we're enclosed, it was a night scene, and I realized those were 15-watt candelabra bulbs in the lamps. So I went to the gaffer and said, do you think we could fit 40-watt? And we did. And there were, I remember, 640 40-watt bulbs, and that's what lit that scene. And you didn't see it, but at the very end, there was a balcony, and I maybe had one 5K bounce off the ceiling. But it was really all those bulbs from the lamps that really lit that scene. And that's something about lighting. I always find, you know, what makes this room different than another room in how it's seen or lit. So I always try to implement, I always start with where I am, you know, where the window is, where the door is, like, you know, what makes that unique in itself? What makes it specific in itself? And that's kind of the way I approach lighting in many situations, where I just don't go in and recreate something. I try to find out what's unique about that space to create the light and maybe add to it, but try to keep that as a style for what that environment is.
All right.
So
yeah,
maybe,
let's take it to some questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got a microphone right there. Let's hear for Ed.
Test. Hey, Ed, I really love the scene in Carol when you're talking about in historical places. Do you remember what bulbs your gaffer put in those? Like, because I imagine you couldn't use incandescents because it would.
Where was it? You mean in Maria?
In Carol, when they fall in love, when.
Oh.
In the club?
Yeah.
You mean the China balls?
All the China balls. What kind of bulbs did you put in those?
Those were just, you know, either. Well, actually, this is funny. We found 2,000-watt bulbs. Yeah, that were, you know, like long ones. Mm-hmm. And we actually we got them out of New York, out of, I forget the place on 10th Avenue. What? What's
Barbizon?
That? Yeah, Barbizon, right. And we bought all of them, and if they touched the paper, they would just go up, right? But we lit those with those 2,000-watt bulbs.
All right, we have a question up here in the front.
Is there ever kind of a conscious thought that goes into, if I make something too beautiful that it might pull the viewer out of the story experience? Is there anything, sort of a compromise?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. I don't want to make things too beautiful. I mean, if they end up being that way, I think it's from a more naturalistic position. I don't try to make them, you know, smoke with shafts of light. I don't try to do that. I mean, in a weird way, when I was shooting Maria, I was unhappy because I thought it fell into that. I felt it was like a very commercialized look of what her world could be. But that was the world she really lived in. So it wasn't, and also I was working off of the actual locations that were similar to where she would have been. So no, I agree with you. I'm always conscious of, I don't want to make the images homogenized, I call it, that they look like they're in a TV commercial, you know, even though I've shot many TV commercials and that's what's expected of you. But when I shoot a narrative film, I'm not trying to make it look just pretty.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for joining us. Two films that really struck me were Dark Waters and Erin Brockovich, and there's sort of a similarity story-wise to the characters that you follow, but differences in the way they look. Did you personally find there were ways you communicated that were similar with Todd, with your director? Curious what that relationship looked like, or how you found the two films were different in your eyes.
Well, again, the location, you know, Erin Brockovich is in the desert in Barsville outside of LA, you know, and that's where it actually happened. So it's hot. And it's, that was like one of the first time I didn't use any lights for the car in the day. I said, God, there's so much light, why do I need lights? You know, let's just see if the negative can hold the exposure latitude, and it did, you know. So I kept the faces down in the car about 1.5, 2 stops, and let it go over outside the window like 3 or 4 stops. And that's what we do. We play the average with the exposure. And then Dark Waters was actually very near where which maybe is my own physical problem because I have lead poisoning, but in that area was the problem with the water from the PFOs or whatever, you know, the contamination of the forever chemicals. And so that was Appalachia, where I went to one of the schools, Ohio University. So it was winter, it was dark, it was cool emotionally, but also visually. And so that had a totally different look than Erin Brockovich. But yes, there was a similar, you know, malfeasance of the corporations that are like poisoning the people.
And then we got another question up here in the front.
Hi, Ed. All your work is so inspiring. If you had to pick a favorite project you worked on?
Favorite film?
Yeah.
Well, they always say they're all your children, so I can't pick one. You always hope it's your last one, but I don't know.
Hello. Yeah. Could you talk about the reflections in Carol?
You mean the window?
All the reflections, it seemed like every scene had some nice reflections.
Well, you know, there was a photographer that really we discovered through the production designer, Mark Freeberg, on Mildred Pierce, Saul Leiter, a New York photographer, you know, in the world of Robert Frank. They were friends, and he was a street photographer. But he was also very close to a lot of abstract expressionist painters. And his photographs were more like abstract expressionism. They were kind of shards of reality, but they were an abstraction. He was more interested in the texture of the world. And so we referenced him in many ways. And it was like this layered images, you know, through windows and rain and smoke and reflections. And again, that was another way to portray. It was another kind of visual metaphor for what emotionally was happening with these two women, you know, where they weren't aware, possibly, or Therese wasn't aware of what was happening to her for her affection and love for this woman, and so they're not fully seeing themselves. And so what better way to show that is not let us, the viewers, see them totally own their own frame, I say. So we see them in this layered images, and maybe that then creates the feeling of what they're feeling. And that to me is what photography or cinematography can be about, is that you can create in the audience the feeling that your characters are having in the story that you're telling. This fellow up here keeps, they are after her.
Regarding that same Reflections motel room Carol sequence, did you said earlier that you had good luck, which is the height of modesty, which could come only from a genius like you. But my specific question is, did you not have a video assist? I know you were shooting film.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
tap?
We had a video assist.
No video tap?
No, we did, but video taps are deceiving when you're shooting film, because that much reflection, I couldn't see how much information I had inside. I mean, I call that educated guess. I knew that was 2.5, 3 stops, so I should have detail, and I should have some detail. And then God knows how bright it was outside. It was at least 3 or 4 stops over. Which brings up, I came up with this EL zone system, and it was a way for me to understand how I could use the digital world like the film world, like what Ansel Adams did with the zone system.